please state your name, your branch, and where you're from?
My name is Lee Freeman. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I served in the United States Army from 1969 to 1971. I did basic and advanced infantry training at Fort Ord, California. After completion of advanced infantry training, I received orders for Vietnam and arrived in Vietnam in April of 1970.
And what was your MOS?
My MOS was 11 Charlie, but when I got to Vietnam, they assigned me to Charlie Company, 2nd of the 506 Infantry of the 101st Airborne. And I asked the clerk, I said, is that where the mortars are? Because the 11 Charlie MOS is mortars. And he started laughing. He says, why, are you a mortar guy? And I said, yeah, that was what I was trained for. And he says, well, not anymore. You're 11 Bravo now. So my MOS was changed on about the 10th day I was in Vietnam, from 11 Charlie to 11 Bravo. But what I really came here to talk about today was not about me so much. I've already given all of that story to the professor at Grand Valley State University who's doing that oral project. Jim Smithers, are you familiar with him?
No.
He comes to our ripcord reunions. All of the, most of the veterans from the Battle of Fire Base Ripcord formed an association, and they have a reunion every year. And Professor Smithers comes in every year, and because they're doing an oral history project, but not only for Vietnam veterans, they do Korea and World War II. And he's going to, Professor Smithers says he's going to do another book about fire-based ripcord. There are 4 of them out there now. And if you read those books, you'll know mostly what went on there. More American service people died in the battle for fire-based ripcord than died on Hamburger Hill. But because the Army wanted to keep it quiet and did not want all of the publicity of having another Hamburger Hill, which fire-based ripcord was another Hamburger Hill, no one has heard of it. Everyone's heard of Hamburger Hill, but no one has heard of fire-based ripcord. And it's and even when you go to the 101st base camp here in the United States at Fort Campbell, where we also have reunions there too. The 101st is pretty closed-mouthed about ripcord because the NVA kicked us off the hill. And anyway, but that's not what I want to talk about is ripcord. I want to talk about the men I served with at ripcord and what it was like to be in the jungle around fire-based ripcord. I don't know if you're familiar with Vietnam, but it was divided into 4 corps, military corps, and I Corps was right, or 1 corps was right below the DMZ, and it's all, there's the coastal plain and then there's the mountains, and the mountains go all the way to the A Shaw Valley, and then from the A Shaw Valley there's Laos. And 101st had been fighting in the A Shaw Valley before I got there, and fire-based ripcord was 2 ridge lines away from the A Shaw Valley. And my first day in the field was at fire-based ripcord, and that's where I met all of these guys in this picture. This is 1st Platoon Charlie Company, 2nd of the 506 Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. That's me down there. This guy here is from Omaha too. His name is John Harvey. He still lives here, and but many of these guys have passed on. And the guys I want to talk about are the guys I met from the first day I was at Fire-Based Ripcord, and how we got into the jungle and what that was like, because the jungle was very brutal. It was a very brutal existence, and the 101st believed in leaving their troops out in the jungle for 60 to 90 days at a time, sometimes up to 120. They didn't believe in bringing their troops back into the base camp. They believed in resupply by helicopter. And so they would bring out jungle fatigues and things like that, and sea rations. not much water, because in the mountains there's always a mountain stream, and that water really tastes good. Mountain water does. On Fire Base Ripcord, it was before it was a 101st Airborne Fire Base. It was the 1st Cavalry Fire Base, and before that it was the United States Marine Corps Fire Base. And there have been some books written by some 1st Cavalry soldiers who were there before we were. But it had been closed down and grown over with the jungle growth, and about a month and a half before I got there, the 101st, my battalion and another battalion attacked that hill. And my squad leader here, his name was Albert Ives. Where is he? Right there. He, when they took back the hill from the North Vietnamese Army, he received a Silver Star for his actions in that battle. And he was my squad leader. And I met him on Fire Base Ripcord, and he was in charge of us. And what was really odd about my Army service is that I was drafted down on 16th Street in Omaha, and one of the guys that was with me down there, he was in basic with me, he was in AIT with me, he went on the plane from California to Vietnam with me. We went to the 101st together. We went to the 2nd of the 506 Infantry Battalion together. We went to Charlie Company together. We went to 1st Platoon together. We went to Sergeant Ives' squad together, and they made him the M60 gunner and me the assistant machine gunner. It was like a buddy plan unofficially. It was just odd that something like that would happen. And his name was Rick Thomas. And his PTSD was so bad, he took his own life 20 years ago. And he and I served together. And when we were in the jungle, we were very close. Since he was the machine gunner and I was his assistant, and we'd known each other from the day we were drafted, it was just uncanny. I'm not sure how familiar people are with how the troops were inserted into the jungle, but with the 101st Airborne, I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the Hueys lined up in the air, and they come down and land, and 6 or 7 or 8 guys jump on a bird, and the bird takes off, and another bird comes in, and another 6 or 7 guys get on, and then once all the helicopters are full of infantry guys, then they go to the LZ, the landing zone. And if the North Vietnamese there see you and happen to shoot at you where you come in, that's called a hot LZ. And in the 101st, if you participate in a hot LZ, you automatically get an air medal. And or you had to do 25 combat assaults. That's called a combat assault. When you have all those troops on the birds, and the birds come in and drop you off, and as you're going in, the door gunners. You said you were a crew chief, right?
Yes, sir.
Were you on a Black Hawk?
I was Apaches.
Oh, okay. Well, do they have side door gunners on those? And okay, well, in the Hueys they got side door gunners, and one of them's a crew chief, one's just a door gunner, and then there's the pilot and co-pilot up front. And there's no benches in there, like I think this picture has. This is what we're talking about. On this square here, there were no doors, there were no seats, it was just a bare floor, and you would jump in there with your rucksack and your weapon and ride off into the sky with this. And so when we left Ripcord, it was one of the hottest days of the year, and we landed on this LZ, and we had lost 3 or 4 guys to heat exhaustion. We didn't go very far, but it was the first time that I heard of the legendary fuck you lizard. You know about the fuck you lizard? When I was in basic training in AIT, they said you're going to Vietnam, and the first thing you're going to hear when you get into the jungle is the fuck you lizard. And it makes a sound like this. Drrr, drrr, fuck you, fuck you, drrr, drrr, fuck you. And this was constant when you were in the jungle. When the sun started going down, you could start hearing the fuck you lizards. But once we got off that hill, we would travel through the jungle single file, and there was always a man in front called the point man, and he always carried a machete. And our captain, Captain Rodriguez, he I think that's his name. If I mess that up, I'm going to be really sorry. he earned a battlefield commission in Korea. And he was the captain. And he believed in going through the jungle as fast as you can. And if you were trained in mortars like I was and all of a sudden became an 11 Bravo, you didn't have the training for that. It was crazy nuts. I mean, you know, it was exhaustion. I mean, and then at night, we would, when the captain decided, okay, we're going to stop here, we would have to get in a circle, dig foxholes, set out claymore mines. Sometimes we would build breastworks in front of the foxholes. And so after all day of humping, which is why we were called grunts, after all days of humping through the jungle, we had to set up, you know, a night defensive position. They were just called NDPs. And so Rick and I were always together. And so for the first 30 days, that was what life was like, humping through the jungle in single file. And the purpose was to find North Vietnamese army, not Viet Cong. Where we were, it was, you could, if you got on top of a hill, you could see North Vietnam from where we were. And we fought North Vietnamese army regulars. You know, they weren't Viet Cong peasants. These guys had uniforms and AK-47s and RPGs and, you know, B-40 rockets and mortars and all that other sort of stuff. What was that one? That machine gun. I used to know all the names of this, but it's been so many years I can't remember all so well. So the one thing about being in the jungle is a very brutal existence because of the nature of the heat, the triple canopy jungle. At night, you were just, you could open your eyes, but you couldn't see anything. You might as well have had your eyes closed, it was that dark. Unless there was a full moon out. But even then, with the triple canopy jungle, not much light penetrated through to the jungle floor. And the mountains there, that's where the NVA had their base camps. And from there, they would go out of the mountains and into the plains where the farmers planted the rice. And they would get their provisions from there and terrorize the civilian population. So the 101st was spread from Laos to the South China Sea in I Corps. And during the day, and so when you got up in the morning, you would eat sea rations, which was the meal. Sea rations were eaten 3 times a day. There was nothing else. No hot meals were flown out to us. There were no showers. Once in a while, you could bathe in a jungle stream, but you'd always have to have, you know, guys on, you know, lookout for that. And so if you were out there for 60, 90, 120 days, you never saw a shower. You never saw a hot meal. And the only time you got, when your clothes got so raggedy, resupply would bring in fatigues and then you would just change out. You know, and it was a very brutal existence because at night in the mountains it got cold actually, and when you'd wake up in the morning, start going through the jungle, all the dew would fall on the back of your neck, and it felt like, you know, somebody was stabbing you in the neck because you were hot and that dew was cold. And as you travel through the jungle, there's all kinds of things to see that you've never seen in your life. It's really a different cultural existence in the jungle, in the army, in Vietnam. You're traveling with the point man, and behind the point man was the slack man, and behind him was, you know, fire teams and machine gun teams, and the lieutenant of the platoon, because we usually did work in platoons. And so Rick, who was my machine gunner, he was with me all through that time. And about a week after we got off Fire Base Ripcord, it started raining, and it rained for a week. And and where we were in line, we always had our squad leader, Burl Ives. We called him Burl Ives after the singer, but that wasn't his name, Burl. He was Albert Ives. Not too many people remember who Burl Ives was, but in the 60s everybody did. And
my mom's cousin.
Yeah. What?
My mom's cousin.
Is that a fact?
Yeah.
Well, do you know Bart Ives? Oh, well, he lives in Kansas City, and that's Burl's brother.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I want to talk about Burl because Burl took care of us. But the one thing that happened during that rain you go up the mountain and you go down the mountain. You go up the mountain and you go down the mountain. And always looking for the North Vietnamese army. And during that rainy season, it would rain for about 10 days. You know, as the point man cuts with the machete, you know, it's all kinds of different kinds of vegetation. There's bamboo out there, there's banana trees, there's trees with vines, it's triple canopy, there's elephant grass, which looks like grass, but only it grows to about as tall as this ceiling. And so the point man's always cutting through different vegetation. One day he cuts through some bamboo, and Sergeant Ives, I don't know what he was doing when he walked along the trail, but all of a sudden the rear of his pants got cut by bamboo. And since it was so hot and nasty with the humidity over there, nobody wore underwear underneath their fatigues. So Rick Thomas, my machine gunner, and I, we walked behind him. And so when we went up the hill, our faces were in Burl Ives' ass. And sometimes he would sit on the trail, which would become muddy, right? So his white ass would be covered with mud, and it looked like a diarrhea explosion. And Rick and I would fight going up the hill. I'd say, no, Rick, you're going to follow Ives up the hill. I'm not having my face in his ass going up this mountain. And so, and because of the rain, we didn't get resupplied. And so for days we walked behind Burl Ives looking at his bare ass until he got some fatigues on resupply. So we went up mountains through the jungle. It was a terrifying existence. It was really horrifying. I mean, if you didn't get shot at, you get PTSD just from being in the jungle, because not only did you have the fuck you lizards, but you had those big orange and black centipedes that were like this, and if they bit you, they were poisonous. There were leeches, which were about that long and looked like skinny worms, but they got a head that goes like this, smelling around for heat. Once they locate a body, they latch on. And so we'd have guys get bitten by the centipedes. We'd have guys get leeches on him. One guy got a leech in his eye and had to be medevaced out. He woke up in the morning and that. And you didn't get much sleep at night because you did 2 hours of guard duty, 2 hours off, 2 hours of guard duty, 2 hours off, and then the sun came up. Okay, so you either got 4 or 6 hours of sleep a night because you had to do guard duty every night. And so then you have the bamboo vipers, which they're green, and the jungle is green. And so you had to look out for them. A friend of mine came across, he was another sergeant in another squad. He killed a cobra. It went up on him while he was walking down the trail, and he fired 20 bullets into him. So there was and then there were tigers. Around Fire Base Rakkasan, they had killed a tiger outside the wire, and they brought it in, and everyone saw the pictures of the tiger. And then there was, farther south, in the southern part of I-Corps, there were elephants. And there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in that jungle. You can't imagine. Spiders, whose bodies, the body of the spider. I remember we walked through the jungle one day, and there was this web that was 2 stories high. And on this web was a spider whose body was a big triangle that was bigger than these 2 sheets of paper. And its legs were like 4 or 5 feet long. Now this sounds improbable, but you had to see it to believe it. And it was a yellow sort of triangular bodied spider. And so it was, so every day, and then there were the pythons, or not pythons, those, what are those snakes that squeeze you to death?
Pythons and
yeah.
boa constrictors.
Yeah, boa constrictors. They're about that big around, okay, and they're about as long as this room. You run across all kinds of stuff in the jungle that a boy from Omaha had never seen in his life over there. And it was all kinds of stuff to be afraid of, and not just the North Vietnamese Army. Plus you're eating sea rations every day for 60 to 90 days. You're not getting a shower. You're not getting hot food. And so Captain Rodriguez would just take us all over as fast as he could. And because his thing was, is if you went slow, the North Vietnamese would attack you. And what we were trying to do is catch them, not have them catch us. And so, as a mortar guy, instead of a 11 Bravo infantry guy, my training was to sit around and put rounds in a tube and fire the mortar. So you're not in physical condition to do that. So when I got to Vietnam, it was very difficult for me and Rick, because we both were mortar guys. And Rick had to carry that M60, which is a big, heavy machine gun. And I had to carry like 6 heavy belts of machine gun ammo. Besides the 6 belts of machine gun ammo, I'd have C rations. I'd have about, not just me, everybody did. Had 6 to 7 to 8 meals in the rucksack. Then everybody had a water blimp, which held 2 gallons of water, which were on the top, we strapped to the top of the rucksack. And then everybody had a claymore mine, and then everybody had frag grenades. And then we also carried a LAW, which is a rocket, anti-tank rocket, but it was good for shooting at the NVA. It's like it was our answer to the RPG, the rocket propelled grenade. That's what. So we carried that too. And we'd all wear a pistol belt, and on the pistol belt you'd have a regular canteen here to drink out of, and then over here you'd have a canteen pouch with 5 hand grenades in it. So at night, when you set up at night in the night defensive position, you would set out and you also carried 2 bandoliers of ammunition, M16 ammunition, across your chest, and all of this going up and down the mountains all day with that heavy water and all those armaments you're carrying, and food, and it was just very exhausting. And so when you only got 4 hours of sleep at night, I remember Sergeant, what's his name? I can't remember his name. Anyway, he said, you know what? He goes, we're so exhausted going through this jungle, everyone hopes we run into the NVA so we can lay down, to get some rest. Because when you get shot at, you fall to the ground and fire back. All right? So it was an exhausting experience those first 30 days. They were, and I got jungle rot. Everybody had jungle rot. And jungle rot looks like this. I still got it. And I got it on this. Everybody says, oh, you got psoriasis. It could be, but jungle rot looks like this. But what it does, it gives you sepsis. And my leg, during those first 30 days, I kept going to the medic. And I'd say, look at this leg here. I got this jungle rot on my knee. Because a lot of times you'd crawl through the jungle. Because there'd be a big log in front of you, and the only way to get around it was to crawl under the log. And so we were always dirty. I mean, if you don't shower and you don't bathe, you get messed up. Your body gets really terrible. And my legs had swollen up to about this large. And so at the end of the first 30 days, they had a stand down, because the company had been in the field for 90 days. And the stand down, they bring the whole battalion into the base camp, and they get cold beer and steaks and 2 or 3 nights rest, or a trip to Eagle Beach, which is what this picture is a trip of our platoon going to Eagle Beach the 2 days after fire base ripcord was closed. So that's what that was like. And when we got back to the base camp, you had everybody standing around naked in the lines, ready to go into a shower tent. The battalion put up big tents with showers in them. So everybody got to take a shower finally. So for me, it was only 30 days, but for most of those guys, it had been 90 days since they had a shower. And so you had to get a shower. They gave you a new set of fatigues, and then before you got your steak, you had to go see the battalion doctor. So the battalion doctor looked at my leg and said, "Hey, what the hell happened? I said, well, it's jungle rot, as you can see. And he goes, well, that's cellulitis. That's not jungle rot. The cellulitis is a lot more serious. And so he said, who's your medic? Because you should have been sent back to the rear way before this. So he said, if you would have come in a week later, we would have had to amputate your leg. Because my leg, it was so big and round from the cellulitis. So they said, we're sending you to the hospital right now. And I go, I'm not going. And they said, what? And I said, look, I've been in the jungle for 30 days. I'm going to have a steak and a beer before I do anything. So the next day they shipped me to the hospital in Fubai, and from there they flew me to the hospital in Cam Bay for recovery. And while I was there, a doctor there saved my life. And how he saved my life was this. Was that after 2 weeks in Cam Bay at the recovery hospital, he looks at my leg and he goes, oh, you're all cured. You ready to go back to your unit? I said, yeah. He says, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a mortar guy, but they got me in the infantry. And he goes, those bastards. He goes, I hate the goddamn Army. I'm drafted too. And he was a captain. And he goes, in another week I'm going to be out of here, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He says, I'm going to give you another week here in the rehabilitation hospital just so you don't have to be in the jungle. Get you another week out of the jungle. And I go, that's great. It just so happened during that the Battle for Fire Base Ripcord started. And my platoon was on Hill 902 with 2nd Platoon. And my good friend Bob Zoller was killed in that battle. We got attacked at 4 in the morning by the North Vietnamese Army and a platoon of sappers. And we had, between 1st and 2nd Platoon, we had 8 guys killed in that attack, and we had like 14 to 20 guys wounded. So when I got back the day before the Battle of 902, which was just about a half a mile from Ripcord. You can see 902 from Ripcord, and you can see not Ripcord from 902. So when I got back, there was a lot of guys that weren't around anymore that I had been serving with. Okay, and one of the guys dead was Bob Zoller, and he was a good friend of mine. And he was what happened to him, according to there are many different versions of what happened to Bob in that battle. But the most agreed on version is once we started getting attacked, or my platoon started getting attacked, the artillery on Fire Base Ripcord started firing illumination rounds. And they would pop above us and so you could see. And even though it was 4 in the morning and it was dark as hell. And I remember this guy here, Bob Tarbuck, he was there that night, and I remember him saying, he said, whenever you saw the illumination round go off above our heads, you'd look down and you'd see all these North Vietnamese heads ducking down. Because if you saw them, you could shoot them. But they would all duck down when the illumination rounds come off. So with Bob, he was in his foxhole with this other guy, and the illumination round is supposed to pop open about 100 feet above you. Well, it didn't pop open until just right above his foxhole. And so he had this bright light in front of him, and he couldn't see. And so he started low crawling up the hill while all this battle is going on, through all of this and that. And he got to the top of the hill, and the captain, Thomas Hewitt, grabbed him. This is one version of how he died. Grabbed him and pulled him in the foxhole because he couldn't see. And at that time, a North Vietnamese soldier ran up with an RPG and fired it into the foxhole, killing the captain and Bob. And I was just at Bob's. They put up a plaque in his town of Mantua, Ohio, and I got a picture of it here. If you want to see it, want to see it?
Yes, please.
Maybe you can hold it up to the camera too.
Let's see, where is it? They put up this monument in his hometown, and you can't read it really because you can see Bob Zoller is the last one on there, and that's in Manaway, Ohio. And Bob Zoller was the last man killed from that town. They have a guy there from World War II, or two of them, and a guy from Korea, and they have Bob. And then I made this plaque, and for Bob, with pictures of 1st Platoon, and I put it on his grave, and this was taken last year. Yeah, last year. And that's me at Bob's grave site with the plaque I made. Now, I put it on there 3 years ago when I first went to see Bob's grave, and somebody in the town thought it was so great that they went and put a wooden frame around it and has permanently set it there next to his grave. So that was a big blow to me to lose Bob Zoller. And then, so 902 was on July 1st, 1970, and it was the first battle of the battle for Fire Base Ripcord. Like I said, more people were killed at Ripcord than were killed at Hamburger Hill. And this was the first major battle of Ripcord. And I wasn't there because of the wonderful doctor down in Cameron Bay who let me stay another week. Because if he had not let me stay at the rehabilitation hospital for another week, I would have been on 902, and I might not be sitting here talking to you today because of that. In the morning of 902, they policed up the guys who were still alive, policed up the bodies of the NVA, and we got all the dead on the helicopters and back, and then Alpha Company, first of the second of the 501st Infantry, Alpha Company, second of the 501st Infantry, who was working the jungle next to us, came into 902 and helped evacuate what was left of my company out of there and back to Ripcord. And then on that day, the NVA started shelling Ripcord with mortars and 51 caliber machine guns every day. And so a lot of guys who were on Fire Base Ripcord were getting killed from mortars and machine gun fire and sniper fire. So that started the 1st of July. At the end of July, before that, on about the 8th or 10th of July, my company was involved in another battle of Hill 1000. When I got back to the base camp was the day 902 happened. And so then they said, get your gear together, and you're going to be going out to the company that's still in the jungle. You know, you're going to march off Ripcord with whoever's left out there. And so you wouldn't have believed it, but this arm got cellulitis and it had swollen up like this. So they sent me to the camp medical tent, and they had me in the hospital for 3 days, and I missed out on Hill 1000. I wasn't there for that battle either. My platoon leader says I had an angel. He says every time we went into battle, you weren't there. He says first you were in Cameron Bay, and now you're in the hospital. And so I finally got out of the hospital and got to where they were at Fire Base O'Reilly. They had gotten down to the battle for Hill 1000 was a mess, and if you read about it, this guy here, John Harvey, in the battle for 1000, he was a squad leader, an E5 sergeant. He attacked up Hill 1000, and with a group of guys. And if I had not been in the hospital, I would have been with them. But they ran up the hill, Hill 1000, and what was happening as they were advancing up the hill, and this is just like on Hamburger Hill, as they're advancing up the hill, running and firing at the NVA were popping up in spider holes right behind them and picking them off. So finally, John Harvey, found himself near the top with hardly anybody with him because everybody had been, either taken cover or been shot. So he and another guy started dragging guys down the hill to retreat from the top of the hill. And he said to me, something I never forgot, he goes, That's when I learned that dead people don't feel anything. I said, what do you mean dead people don't feel anything? He said, we were trying to get down that hill as fast as possible, and I had him by one foot, and this guy had him by the other, and we were dragging him. His head was hitting all these logs and stuff, and I noticed he didn't cry out or say, ouch. So dead people don't feel anything. He found that out in the Battle of 1000. So the only battle that I was involved with in the ripcord battle was we went out to secure a hilltop, which was 605. And over on 805, for 10 days, 101st Airborne troops were fighting off nightly attacks from the NVA. And they were taking a lot of casualties. And so it was in the afternoon, and they wanted to withdraw them from Hill 805, so they had us land on Hill 605, which was right next to it. So we came in the helicopters, and as we were coming into the helicopters, Burl Ives, right here, my squad leader, he goes, there's red smoke on the LZ. And we were coming into the LZ, and we were looking down, and Burl says, see that red smoke? I go, yeah. He goes, that's a hot LZ. So he says, as soon as this bird lands and we jump off, I want you to run to that tree over, which is what he could point down over there. We're going to meet over there. So with the hot LZ, it means that the helicopters are being fired at. So we rolled in, we all jumped off the helicopter, and I took off running for that tree. I didn't take but 5 steps, and I tripped over a log. And I went face down on the LZ, and right in front of me was an NVA pith helmet. And I thought, boy, this would be a great souvenir, but they always told us those things are booby trapped, so don't touch it. So I didn't touch it. I got up and ran to the tree. About a minute later, here comes another guy running over and goes, look what I got. He got a souvenir NVA pith helmet. I thought, damn, I could have had that. But then the NVA started firing CS gas at us. And Burl, my squad leader, he kept us all in line, because when we first got hit with that North Vietnamese tear gas, we all were panicked and we're going, what? Because we didn't have any gas masks in the jungle. You know, that's something extra to carry that you aren't going to carry. And then the gas dissipated, and we stayed there taking 2 Delta companies, Delta 1506 and Delta 2506, were evacuated. And by the time we were evacuated, it was about 10 o'clock at night. We were supposed to spend the night on the hill. But Lieutenant of 2nd Platoon had gotten so dark the helicopters couldn't find us, so he put out a strobe light in the middle of the LZ. And you know what a strobe light is. It goes blink, 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 and you can see it for 10 miles. And we're right there in the middle of Indian country at night in the dark, and every time, and the birds were only coming in like once every 20 minutes. They weren't like lined up like on a combat assault. They were only coming in, and then guys would jump on the bird, and the bird would go back to the base camp. And then you'd have to sit out there in the dark with that light blinking for you know, till the next bird came in 20 minutes later, and every time a bird left, there were fewer guys on the LZ. And I got out on the next to the last bird. And I jumped on that helicopter, and the guy goes, Freeman, this bird's too crowded. You get on the next one. I said, hell no, I'm riding this one out of here. Because there were only 10 guys left. And when we left, there were only 5 guys left. And my platoon leader, Lieutenant Bob, was on the last bird out. But from then we went back, and that day after, the day after that, Alpha Company, 2nd of the 506, had 21 guys killed in a North Vietnamese ambush. And then they were evacuated, and they came back to the base camp, Camp Evans. And so the whole battalion finally came back. And then we spent the night there, and then the next morning they said, get up, because in the base camp you had a cot to sleep on, which was great. And there were showers and hot food. So the next morning they go, grab your gear, get down to the helipad down there. We're going to go out to Ripcord and save it. So we're all down there on the helipad with our gear waiting to get on a bird to go out to Ripcord again and attack the NBA. Here comes a Catholic priest, the Catholic chaplain, over to where we're all at in this big area, and he goes, I want all you Catholic boys to come on over here, and I was Catholic. So I went over there and he goes, look, he said to all of us, he said, look, you're all going to a place where a lot of you aren't going to come back. So I'm going to give you absolution. We don't have time for communion because you're going to get on those birds and get out there, but some of you aren't coming back, so your sins are forgiven. And he goes, that's it. And we all went back to our weapons and our gear and sat on the pad. Finally, about 2 hours after that, word come down that they were going to close Ripcord rather than save it. Because according to the rumor that came out later, Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, said that there was not going to be another Hamburger Hill on Firebase Ripcord. Of course, there already had been, with all the casualties that the 2nd of the 506 Infantry and the 1st of the 506 and first of the, or the 2nd of the 501st, 3 battalions suffered major casualties. Firebase Ripcord was a 506, 2nd of the 506 Firebase, so that was our responsibility. We also had these other battalions coming in and helping us. So that was that. And then, so they closed down Ripcord instead of sending us out to save it. And then the next day we went to Eagle Beach, which was a resort area that the 101st set up on the South China Sea, where they had bands come in and play for the troops, and there was hot food and all the beer you could drink. And then we never went back out of the jungle till August 1st. And I was out in the jungle till the 3rd week in November. And during that time, during the course of, we had a lot of guys wounded severely from landmines. I remember the first day, I started walking point when we went back out. I was a point man. For 60 days, I was the point man for Charlie Company 1st Platoon. So whenever 1st Platoon was to lead through the jungle, I was the one with the machete going through, cutting jungle. And this black guy who's not in this picture, Brother Barty, he was behind me, and he was my slack man. And some days he'd walk point and I'd walk slack. But we were always together. We were a team. And despite what my mother told me growing up in Omaha, black people weren't the enemy. They were human beings, just like white people. We had a medic called Doc Soul. He was black. We had a number of black troops. And out there against the NVA, there's no such thing as white and black. It's green. It's green. And so I learned an important lesson about human relations there, just from that existence. And so we cut through on 902, Rick got wounded, my machine gunner, and he ended up back in Fort Collins, Colorado with his wounds from Hill 902. So after that day in July when the NVA attacked 902, I never saw Rick again till a year later back in Omaha. So I walked point, and we did all kinds of stuff. It was the same old thing that I'd already described. And harsh conditions. Only now, the NVA were following us around and seeing where we were going, and they would put landmines ahead of where we were going, and we had a lot of guys lose their foot. We called them toe poppers. And one day we were in this one area, and we had the colonel with us. The battalion colonel was humping with us. But we couldn't get him out of the jungle, and he wanted to go back to the base camp because everybody was losing their feet from these toe poppers. And so Sergeant Funk came down one day. And Burl Ives was still out there, but for some reason, he wasn't the squad leader anymore, but Sergeant Funk was. And he came down, he goes, we need some security guys to follow the battalion colonel to this LZ about, 500 feet away, and so he can get a loach in and get a ride back to the base camp. So Sergeant Funk looks at me, he looks at my slack man, Brother Barty, he looks at me, and he looks at Brother Barty. He looks at me again, and he looks at Barty and he goes, all right, Barty, you go with the colonel. 10 minutes later, Barty lost his foot to a landmine. That's how close I came to losing my foot, was that he couldn't decide which of us he was going to go with the colonel. So Brother Barty, he still lives in Houston, Texas. And Doc Soul lives in Kansas City. And I had lunch with Doc Soul about 4 years ago. He and I still talk together back and forth on text. And then, so it was during that time, while we were trying to get the colonel out, that we had an NDP, and then we had a group of new guys. Since I'd been there since April, once you're a veteran in the unit, they don't pick on you very much to do any kind of shit detail. Well, one shit detail, but took expertise, was to create an LZ, which you would wrap det cord and C4 and dynamite around a tree and blow it up, and so the helicopters could come in and land and take the colonel out. Well, all that blowing up of trees and stuff and chainsaws and hacking with machetes awakened the NBA in the area, and they came down. And no one, we were just trying to get the damn colonel out of the field. And I was just like 50 feet from where they were building this LZ. And this is the moment why I'm 100% disabled from PTSD. Okay? So what they did is the NVA got on the other side of the, here's the LZ, here's the NVA. So they start firing RPGs and AK-47 fire on the guys who were building the LZ. Well, that fire came right across the LZ into the NDP where I was. The night defensive position that we had set up in a circle around this little hill. So when they started firing and RPGs started exploding, these guys were running for cover. Well, a lot of the fire from the NVA was coming into the NDP, and I was standing there with a couple guys smoking and joking, ha 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 ha. And right here where this American flag was a tree. My M16 was right here. I'm right here. Okay? So when the firing starts, I dive from my rifle. Before I get it, a guy behind me grabs it away. So I'm being shot at with no means of protection. My thing was I was going to grab the rifle, go into a prone position, return fire. But since I think maybe God had something to do this, because if I was to return fire, it would have been right across the LZ where our guys were. So I guess that's why God decided I wasn't going to get that rifle. and so because the bullets were going snap, snap, whiz, 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 and all this, and leaves were falling from the trees from all the AK-47 rounds and stuff, and so I got down like this as far as I could under the dirt. But the firing kept going. I go, I got to get out of here because this is a kill zone. So I started low crawling up to the command post on top of the hill, and I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have any grenades. I didn't have nothing. And so as you're going up the hill, there's jungle all over, right? So you're making noise trying to go up the hill. So the guys on the hill, I looked up, and there was a guy right there with an M16 pointed in my face. He thought I was in one of the NBA. So we have a password in the 506 battalion, which is Currahee. If you've ever seen that movie on HBO, Band of Brothers, those are the Currahees. That was our unit in World War II. And I was in this unit in Vietnam. And so they said if you ever got lost in the jungle and someone was calling out for you, yell Currahee, because then they'll know that you're actually a U.S. soldier and not an NVA trying to lure somebody in. It's an Indian word that means stand alone, and it's from the mountain that they trained on down in Toccoa during World War II. So anyway, that was the beginning of my PTSD, because I could feel the adrenaline going through my brain just like I'd never felt it before. I was just overwhelmed from the fright and of it all. And when I got up to the command post, the platoon sergeant goes, "Hey Freeman, where's your rifle?" I couldn't answer him because it looked bad. It looked bad. How do you explain you don't have your rifle in the middle of a firefight? And plus the adrenaline, which was circulating through my body so quick, so relentlessly, I was like in another place. And he goes, "Well, you get your ass back to your position." And I was so stunned and amazed and whatever you would call it. All I was doing was taking baby steps down the trail to get back to my position. I didn't have a rifle. There were still gooks in the area. They were sending guys out on patrol. And where was my rifle? Where was my rifle? And when I got back to my NDP position, I looked around and my rifle wasn't there. And nobody had it. And I had to go through the jungle for the next 3 days without a rifle, because the rifle had disappeared. The guy standing next to me took it. 2 years ago, I found out what happened to my rifle. After 50 years, I found out what happened to my rifle. So all this time, I'm feeling ashamed and terrible, because I was in a firefight and wasn't able to fight because I didn't have my rifle. And it looked bad. It looked real bad. And I was, I thought, damn, this is terrible. Because I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy. I was going to grab the rifle, lay down fire, return fire. But it looked bad. But 2 years ago, I found out. I went to a ripcord reunion down in Springfield, Missouri, and Buffington, who was another machine gunner, he was on the LZ that got fired on. He was on the LZ that, to get the colonel out of there. And after the NVA went away, they finally did return fire and drive the NVA away from the LZ. Then the medevac started coming in and picking up the wounded, because the LZ had been finished enough that a medevac helicopter could fly in and pick up the wounded. So and I just found this out 2 years ago, 50 years after it happened, that when they put the wounded on the helicopter, because I was still stunned in the NDP, I wasn't doing nothing. I was just standing around in numb. And when they put the wounded on the helicopter, they were putting their gear in there too. Guess whose rifle got thrown aboard the helicopter back to the base with the wounded? I never knew that for 50 years. That's what happened to my rifle. They thought it was one of the wounded guy's rifle. And they don't count rifles when they're throwing stuff on the the medevac. They're just loading up stuff as quick as they can so the medevac can get out so it doesn't get shot at too. After that, I was no good in the jungle. I couldn't do guard duty anymore. I couldn't do the 2 hours on, 2 hours off. I became a liability. I wasn't focused for the mission anymore. I had what they call, I guess, shell shock, because I couldn't function. And finally, after a couple weeks of my, I guess, inactivity in the mission of the and my demeanor that attack had done to me, I couldn't take care of myself. I didn't care about my weapon getting rusty. I didn't care about nothing. I slept through the night instead of pulling my turn of guard duty, and that was a real terrible thing to do, because when you sleep on guard duty, you're exposing the men around you to harm. And I would never want to do that, but my mind was so screwed up, I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it. And so finally they sent me back to the rear, and I was in Charlie Company, and I got back to the rear. Echo Company was where the mortars were. So I got transferred from Charlie Company to Echo Company and became a mortar guy at the base camp. And that's pretty much the end of my tour of Vietnam. But I want to talk about Burl Ives. You know, Silver Star winner, died homeless on the beaches in Galveston, Texas in 2010. He was waiting to get his Social Security. He was going to get $600 in Social Security, and he decided he could live on that $600. But he had a hemorrhage before he could get his Social Security, and he died. Rick Thomas, from he's not in this picture. There's Burl right there with that cap. He took his own life 20 years ago because what I learned through my work with PTSD, and the VA never really started working with Vietnam veterans and PTSD until the late 90s and the early 2000s. When I go to these reunions, I never talk to anybody who got any help for that. But everybody was telling me how to file claims. So I was doing that. So while I was filing claims for my PTSD, this one psychiatrist or psychologist said, you know, whatever disease you have, if you don't get treatment for it, it doesn't get better. It gets worse. And PTSD is the same way. Before I got this help, he says, you've gone 40 years without any kind of treatment for your PTSD. I used to have terrible panic attacks when I came home from Vietnam. Just terrible. I couldn't function at University of Nebraska, Omaha, where I was taking classes. I could not get up in front of a class and speak. I could not do that, and there were some classes where you had to. Anyway, but Rick came back. When he got back from Fort Collins, his wife met him at Epley Airfield, and she picked him up on the way in. She goes, I want a divorce. And Rick was suffering from the PTSD from his wounds on 9/02, which was a very terrible battle that night that I missed out on. And so he wasn't getting any treatment either. And his got worse. And one thing about PTSD that causes a lot of anger and a lot of emotion is that you don't have the ability to focus anymore. On almost every task you make mistakes because you lose focus, and whatever the task is, you lose focus. And then things happen and you get angry and all kinds of mess. And so Rick was going through that. And like me, Rick and I were both living in Omaha. We were both self-medicating with alcohol. His got so bad that his wife tried to take him in. He says, I've killed myself with booze. I've killed myself. Well, eventually, it wasn't the booze that killed himself, it was himself. And so every Memorial Day and Veterans Day, he's buried out here in Forest Lawn. I go up and decorate his grave, you know, and he was a wonderful guy. We went fishing out on the Platte River when I got back, and he told me what happened on 9/02 that night when we were fishing, because, you know, I wasn't there. And it just breaks my heart to talk about it. It breaks my heart that Burl Ives died homeless on a beach in Galveston, Texas. He had a Silver Star. He earned a Silver Star for bravery. And he couldn't, because of his PTSD, he could not maintain a job. He could not maintain a job. I had 20 jobs in 40 years with PTSD. 20 jobs in 40 years. So finally, I got my 100% disability because I couldn't get a job because I had no references. Or if I put down references, they'd call up and they'd say, don't hire that guy. So finally, after filing claims over and over and over again, the VA awarded me 100% disability. And that's how I've been surviving for the last 7 years. Because me and my wife, we were on the poverty's edge before that, because I couldn't get a job. So since then, I joined the VFW. I'm a member of the Honor Guard. I go to a lot of cemeteries. I fire 3 rounds at veterans' funerals. And to first start that, I had to talk to a Korean War veteran. I said, look, how do you manage to fire this rifle after serving in combat in Korea? He goes, you just gotta not think about it. That's just a solution that you go, what? Not think about it, because I thought it was gonna be a hard time for me to fire that rifle after I hadn't fired a rifle for 50 years. So he helped me along, and so now I'm able to do it without thinking about it. The gunfire doesn't bother me, but we have a female member of the Honor Guard who just does parades and other events, but cannot do, her name's Sherry. Sherry cannot do funerals because the gunfire gives her flashbacks. And I've had flashbacks and nightmares since I can ever remember. I'm still seeing a VA psychiatrist. I stopped seeing the psychologist about 6 months ago because nothing was going on there. And I'm going to quit this psychiatrist thing because I'm going to be 72 in another month or two, and I can't change who I am now. And I mean, I like getting the Prozac because that controls my anger. Because when you have PTSD, you got anger. You know what I'm talking about. And it's because of the lack of focus. You lose focus, only you don't realize you lose focus. And it causes you things to happen and you get angry. And mostly you're angry with yourself. And with PTSD, there's a lot of self-hate. That's why Rick took his life. That's why Burl was living on a beach. And we've had a number of guys, and there's something about combat, and I've been lucky because like my platoon leader, Lieutenant Bob said, you had an angel. He said, because there's something about combat that a lot of Vietnam veterans die young, which I mean in their 50s and stuff, and they were in heavy combat. There's something about that just kills you later on in life. And it killed Rick, it killed Burl, but like I said, I had an angel. So that's why I'm still around. And that's what I wanted to talk about.
We greatly appreciate that.
I'm sure I've gone on way too long.
You're fine.
Do you have any questions?
Is that 1 hour?
Yes.
So you're absolutely fine. I have a question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
One of our interviewers the other day brought some of the actual pay money in. And I just thought, how neat not only to put this in his interview, because we can put that photograph that you gave and explained and shared some of those folks, we can put that in your interview as well. But this might recant some of the things that you may have bought or may have spent, a cold beer or something to send home. But I think that series is probably right around the same time period that you were there.
I got one of these at home. My platoon leader has a North Vietnamese Army 1,000 dong thing because one day our point man killed an MVA paymaster. There were so many MVA soldiers around, they were going through the jungle on the trails, and one day the paymaster and his partner came up the trail on one side of the hill. Our point man with Charlie Company came up the other side, and the paymaster's assistant saw him and pulled up his AK-47 and fired a shot, and the shot went through the shoulder of our point man, but he still had the wherewithal to kill the paymaster and his assistant with his M16. And so then when they searched the paymaster, they found thousands of NVA money. And when I just saw Lieutenant Bob a couple months ago, where he lives in Ohio, we went back to see Bob Zoller. He has a North Vietnamese dong, and it's a little bit bigger than this one right here. And he got it from the paymaster that was killed that day by our point man. And everybody got some, but I wasn't there, so I don't have any. But I got some other photos you may want to see from my time in Vietnam. Would you like to see them?
Certainly. Yeah, if you'd hold them up to the camera there.
I can assist with that.
Okay.
I'm having trouble. Photos. Not this one.
Let me stop from you asking questions now.
Come on. See, it's lack of focus. And I don't know what's going on. Here we go. Oh no, I think it's in my email.
So did you get married before or after you were in the
After.
military?
My wife and I met in kindergarten at Manalusa School out in North Omaha. But after kindergarten, I went to Florence School, but she stayed at Manalusa, and then we reconnected at McMillan Junior High. We both had Spanish together, and then in high school we both had typing and some study halls together at North High School, but we never dated or anything. And then when I got back from Vietnam, I stopped at the Westroads one day, and you know, when you get out of the Army, you let yourself go. I had hair down to here and a beard down to here, and you know where that clock is in the center of the Westroads? Mm-hmm. I came down this aisle, she came down that one, and right by there, I saw her, and she saw me. And she said, "Lee Freeman, is that you?" And the rest is history. And I've got 2 kids and 4 grandkids. So.
Sounds like she was very supportive in your journey to healing.
Yeah, she saved my life twice. Once in San Francisco and once in London. I was going to be mugged in San Francisco because some guy talked me into saying that this bus wasn't going back to our hotel. He says, the bus goes the other way back to your hotel. And this was at midnight in San Francisco on a bus. And we were riding a bus. And I said, "Hey, Vic, this guy says we're going the wrong way." And so the bus came to a stop, and this guy got up and goes, "Come on, man, let's go." And I turned to my wife and I go, "Come on, Vicky, let's go." And she goes, "There's something about women who are more perceptive than men. Because if she hadn't have said no, I would have got off that bus. And guess where that bus was going?
To your hotel?
To our hotel."
How did your family take care being overseas?
My dad was a prisoner of war in Germany during World War II. And he got shot down from a B-24 that was on a bombing run in Austria. And he was the last one out of the plane. He was the nose gunner. And when the plane got hit and went down, a lot of shrapnel came through the glass where he was the nose gunner and knocked his front teeth out and lodged in his throat. And he had to get out of that glass bubble. In order to get out of it, he had to take his parachute off. And the plane's fallen. He had to get out of that glass bubble, take his parachute off in order to squeeze out of there, and then put his parachute back on, and then jump out of the plane. And after he jumped out of the plane, the Germans down below were shooting him. He had 3 machine gun bullet holes in his left arm. I remember as a child taking my finger and putting my finger in these holes on his arm where he had these machine gun bullets. So he lost a lot of blood, and the pilot who he met on the ground thought he was going to die. Anyway, and he was a prisoner of war camp, and he came back with PTSD as well. He died at age 49. He drank himself to death. And one of the things he often did was to beat me with the belt buckle. So I think I had secondary PTSD before I even went into the Army. But it used to, my mom said it used to, while I was in Vietnam with the Army, my mom used to say it would keep him up at night.
Do you have a message for any of our younger people that haven't experienced or have any knowledge of the actual issue?
What I would say is that our politicians keep making the same mistake. After the Korean War, it was fought to a stalemate. And all those Korean veterans were like, what did our friends die for? The same thing happened in Vietnam after 1975. Why were all our buddies killed, and all those families who no longer have their sons and brothers and husbands who are dead from fighting in Vietnam for what? And the same thing now with Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm sure all of those veterans are feeling, why did our friends lose their lives? Why? For what? All those 3 wars that we've been in, and thousands of lives have been lost, and a lot of, as you know, people with PTSD walking wounded. Not all wounds are visible. War is a terrible thing, and as I said earlier, just being in the jungle in Vietnam would give you PTSD without being shot at by the North Vietnamese. So, yeah. So if you're going to join the military, and I think it's a very honorable profession, I really do. I've known a lot of professional military people who are outstanding people, but the politicians abuse us. They abuse us, and there's a saying about, which they're saying now about that Iraq and Afghan veterans. They go, especially about this recent PACT Act, which was, if you're going to send them, you got to mend them. And politicians have a way of sending you to war, but then when you come back, nothing. Because in 1972, I went to the VA, and the doctor said, are you having flashbacks? And I go, yeah. He says, how about night bears? I go, yeah, I got that too. He says, that'll go away. Guess what? He was wrong. In fact, it got worse. So, if you're going to make the military a career, and if you're in combat arms, it's going to affect you for the rest of your life.
Do you have any questions?
No, I do have a recollection, and it's certainly not about me, but there's so many of our veterans that in that Project 22, you mentioned friends that have taken their lives. In many of the African cultures, something that they believe that reflects on what you just said is that when you go into the military, you're truly a different person when you come out. You as much a different person as somebody with completely different DNA. You are not that same person.
This is me giving the peace sign with my mortar crew after I got out of the jungle when I was with Echo Company. That's not me with Charlie Company, that's me with Echo Company. I'm holding the peace sign there. A sniper that I knew on Fire Base O'Reilly took that picture, and he passed away just within this last year. I don't know what the hell happened to those photos. You know, you get so many photos, you don't know what you're going to do. But I got a group of photos of my time with Charlie Company that shows us in the jungle. Over in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the 506 has put up a walkway of bricks of men who served with the 506. And this one is my buddy Rick, who was...
Nope, it turned on us.
This is my buddy Rick, who was wounded on Hill 902 and is buried out at Forest Lawn. That's his brick. And I think Burl Ives is here too. No, I don't have Burl. I got me. There's me. Because I was a point man for 60 days. That was one of the few times in my life I ever became proficient in anything. Was being a point man in Vietnam. One night, Captain Lamb, who took over from Captain Hewitt, who was killed, you know something's up when the captain of the company comes over and puts his arm on your shoulder. And go, what's going on here? Because he chewed me out because I was practicing Ranger landing with the slicks. When this, see the skids here? You know how to do a Ranger landing on a slick? See that skid there? Well, while the bird's coming down, you get out of the bird and stand on the thing and just hold on to the bird and ride in like you're surfing, So one day we were riding into a Firebase Rakkasan, where they shot that tiger, and he chewed me out for doing that. But he came and put his arm around my shoulder, and he goes, "See that hill there?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "I want to go over that hill." I go, "Fine. I want you to lead the company over that hill." And I go, "Fine, I'll do that. I've been doing it for a long time now." He goes, "Only we're going to do it tonight when the full moon comes out." I said, "Captain, that's a triple canopy jungle up there." I said, "The moonlight ain't going to penetrate that." And I know. And I thought he would know. I said, we can't do that." And he goes, "Are you sure?" I go, "Well," I said, "you really want to do this? Because you never go through the jungle at night up there." Now, the guys in the flatlands, the Marines used to do night patrols all the time. But in the jungle, it sounds like a herd of elephants going through. But he wanted to do a night hump. And I was the point man. So at midnight or around there, I got in front with my machete and we started up that hill and down the other side. You couldn't see nothing. You might have been doing it blind. And so we got down the hill and we got trapped in this bog, and I turned around and goes, "Send Captain Lamb up here so he can see this," which he won't see because it's so goddamn dark. And so they said, "Oh, he got on a helicopter and went back to the base camp before we took off." I couldn't believe it.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question.
Where the hell are these pictures?
If you want, we're getting close to the time.
All right.
Any of the pictures that you would like to submit, we still can do that at any time.
Can I email them to you?
You absolutely can.
All right. I still have your email or your email up on my computer, and I got all kinds.
If you want to us to take pictures for you just on regular paper like what you have on that, I'd be glad to do that too, so that you have some if you want them.
Oh, I got a whole scrapbook.
Okay, you got them saved and stuff,
Yeah.
because that's what I don't want you to just have them on a phone, because I end up losing all mine.
Well, when I was in Cameron Bay in recovery, I bought a camera. So all of these pictures are after 902 and after ripcord. All my pictures are of us in the jungle after that. I don't have any pictures of before ripcord. But like I said, there's 4 books on ripcord, and I can't find those pictures. They're on here somewhere. But yeah.
All right.
So there. Now people can read or look at my other one on the Grand Valley State Oral History Project. They sent me a CD with, my thing. But it's a longer one. It is almost 2 hours. They wanted everything from 1969 to 1971.
And we would love to do that too, but the big
Yeah.
thing on this, share your story. We want, like you started, what's important to you, what you want to
Yeah.
share, and that's
I
what,
wanna,
I mean, I got goosebumps because there's so many things that I learned today listening to you. With 25 years in the military, I have bits and pieces, and every one of these stories kind of fill some of those pieces in. Because you hear about Hill 902, but I haven't seen any stories on them.
there's 4 books on Ripcord, the Battle of Ripcord, and in every one, there's an entire chapter on Hill 902. So if my platoon leader, Bob Liebecky, was on Hill 902. He lost his hearing, but he made it back to he didn't make it to Hill 1000 either. No, he came back and he was my platoon leader while I was a point man until the end of September. Then he got a job as some liaison officer job. I forget what it was, but anyway, I don't know why I'm talking about that. I lose focus.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time with us, and after you turn this off, we'll go do a tour real quick.
Okay, are we off? Or did you want more to ask me?
No, we are good. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.